Hey everybody, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at battery swapping, and we're really going to be focusing on NIO here today because they're really the only company right now that's doing battery swapping at a very large scale. NIO has had multiple generations of their battery swapping stations. Currently, they're starting to roll out their Generation 3 stations, but those have only started rolling out this month, I believe. So most of the stations that are out there are their Generation 2 stations. Basically, the idea behind a battery swap station is that drivers can roll up to these stations and just get their batteries swapped out in just a few minutes, which is obviously a lot less time than it takes to charge at even the fastest DC fast chargers today. Now, NIO claims that their Generation 2 stations only take about 3 minutes to swap, but in reality, this is kind of excluding the amount of time that it takes to back into the station and then roll out of it once it's done. So for most of the videos I was watching of people using these stations, usually the whole process from start to finish, including backing in and exiting, the whole process took about 6 minutes or so. So it's still pretty good. It's still certainly a lot faster than using DC fast charging, but still it's a bit slower than what NIO claims. NIO's second generation swap stations can accommodate up to 13 batteries at once, so even if you just used the station and deposited a dead battery essentially, the next person doesn't have to wait around for that battery you just deposited to charge, because there's other batteries inside that station that are fully charged, ready for them to get swapped into their car. These second gen stations are also capable of doing 312 swaps per day. But, if you really think about it, this is just for back-to-back use. So, there's going to be a good amount of downtime at these stations. How many people are really going to be getting their battery swapped at 4 a.m., for example, So, yeah, if the station is being used non-stop 24/7, then yes, it's capable of 312 swaps per day. But, of course, it's not really going to be reaching that level. So those are the basics of the second generation swap stations, but NIO's third generation of stations has some upgrades to it. Probably the biggest factor with these Generation 3 stations for the drivers is that the process takes about 20% less time. Now, of course, that's kind of just the time that it takes for the robot to do its job, so there's probably going to be some more time again for backing into the station and leaving, but it's still, the whole process should be shorter than the second gen stations overall. Additionally, the Gen 3 stations can accommodate up to 21 battery packs, opposed to the 13 in the second gen stations. They've also got new liquid-cooled bidirectional charging modules. These things have a 98% maximum efficiency, and they have charge and discharge power of 62.5 kilowatts. So essentially, these are DC fast chargers connected to all 21 of those battery packs in these second gen stations. Now, since these new charging modules are bidirectional and the batteries are capable of vehicle to grid, all of NIO's battery swap stations, at least the Generation 3 ones that they're planning on building right now, all of these stations are also doubling as basically a stationary storage plant. So it's the same concept as a traditional, actual stationary storage plant, where you're buying energy off of the grid at a lower price when the energy is not as much in demand. And then once it's more in demand, you go ahead and sell it at a higher price. So, for example, commonly you would buy it at night and then sell it during the day when everybody's using electricity. Doing this helps to stabilize the grid, but more importantly to NIO, it provides them with another source of revenue for these battery swap stations. These newer stations work completely autonomously, so you have the choice to either stay inside your car while the battery is getting swapped, or you can get out before the process begins if you need to go to the bathroom or get a snack or, whatever. At the Gen 3 stations, if there's a wait of, say 5 cars in front of you, you can just park your car in one of the parking spaces right there near the station, and you can just kind of set it to get in line basically, and you can walk away, and this whole process will just happen entirely autonomously. Once your car's turn is up, it will automatically roll into the station, get its battery swapped, and then roll back out into the parking space again. From what I've seen, most NIO drivers have never seen any issues with these battery swap stations, so they seem to be pretty reliable at this point in time. Looking at the pricing of using the battery swap stations, it's still more expensive than just using DC fast charging, but of course the process is a lot faster. Basically, if you don't have any sort of subscription, which we're going to get to, but if you don't have any of that and you're just doing a battery swap, then you're looking at about a $10 fee for just the battery swap process itself, in addition to about 20 cents per kilowatt hour for the electricity you use. These stations give you a battery with about 90% state of charge, so if you rolled up to it with a 75 kilowatt hour battery at 10% state of charge, then you're going to be looking at about $12 for the electricity, in addition to that $10 base price for the swapping process itself, so you're looking at a total of about $22. Now alternatively, NIO also offers a subscription for your car's battery called Battery as a Service. Essentially, you don't own the battery, and instead NIO does. Basically, the purchase price of your car ends up being lower if you go this route, but then you're going to end up needing to pay a monthly subscription for pretty much the rest of the vehicle's life. But if you do go this route, then you get access to a few free battery swaps per month completely for free as part of your subscription. Now, I'm not completely sure what the pricing is for these subscription models. I've seen a number of different people saying different prices, but I think it might be about $150 per month for the 75 kilowatt hour battery, and then about $220 per month or so for the 100 kilowatt hour battery. But again, those might not be totally accurate. Now, despite that pretty steep monthly price, apparently most of the people go ahead and choose the battery subscription in the regions where it's offered, just because of the perks that it has with the free battery swapping and the lower upfront purchase price of the vehicle. This subscription is pretty flexible because as battery technology continues to advance, you can always get the newer batteries in your vehicle. You're not just stuck with the same battery for the whole vehicle's life. As far as I know, there's only two battery sizes right now, that being 75 kilowatt hours and 100 kilowatt hours. But from the way it sounds, there was previously a 70 kilowatt hour battery as well, but it seems like that one is being replaced by the 75 kilowatt hour battery. In the past, NIO has also announced plans to release a 150 kilowatt hour battery using semi-solid state cells, so current members of NIO's Battery as a Service subscription would be able to upgrade to these higher capacity batteries for an additional fee, although from what it seems like, it might only be available for specific vehicle models. So essentially, if you're wondering whether or not this subscription is worth it, basically on the surface, yes, it is if you're buying your car new and you're only planning to keep it for about 6 years or so. Beyond that, though, the subscription, the cost of paying the subscription ends up being more than what it would have been to just buy the battery up front when you bought the vehicle. Of course, depreciation is also probably going to be a very different story between these two battery ownership models, so it's really hard to say exactly which one is better in the long run. One of the biggest disadvantages to going with the subscription is that, of course, even if the car is 10 or 15 years old, you're still going to be needing to pay that monthly subscription. Of course, this isn't exclusive to just the cars using the subscription model. This can also apply to the cars paying for battery swaps as they go. Now, there is one way of canceling this Battery as a Service subscription, and that's by buying your battery back from NIO. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like this is discounted in any way, so if you're needing to buy back a 75 kilowatt hour battery, it's going to be about $11,000, and then if you're buying back a 100 kilowatt hour battery, that's going to be closer to $20,000. So it's pretty expensive to cancel the subscription because it's just really expensive to buy the battery back. Now, shifting more towards the business side of things for NIO, I do see a number of advantages and disadvantages to using battery swap stations. One concern that I have is how they plan on handling all of the compatibility across all their models in the long run. Basically, if they build a battery in 2035, does it still need to be compatible with a vehicle built in 2021? I don't know. So it'll be interesting to see how they end up solving that kind of a problem. But one advantage to doing battery swapping is that these stations can also double as a stationary storage plant, buying energy at lower prices and selling it at higher prices, providing NIO with additional revenue for their swap stations. And this goes into the next point, which a lot of people view as a massive negative for swap stations, which is that in order to build out a swap station, you need to supply it with extra battery capacity. I mentioned the Generation 3 stations. They support up to 21 batteries in there. So those batteries are basically just sitting there in the station, not being used in people's vehicles. So a lot of people see this and they think that there's a lot of extra battery capacity needed in order to support battery swapping. And this is something that a lot of people view very negatively. From what I've heard, the extra battery capacity that's required to support battery swap stations is only about 5 to 10% greater than the amount of vehicles out there. So yes, it is more upfront investment to build out these battery swap stations, but if that extra battery capacity inside these swap stations is being used as stationary storage, then I don't see that extra capacity really being that big of an issue. Now, there is concern around the older batteries in these swap stations because, you wouldn't want to go to the station and then get a battery that has some degradation on it, so you kind of don't get what you pay for in that circumstance. I think what NIO can do with these older batteries with some degradation is they can just pull them out of circulation and use them at a dedicated stationary storage plant where they can go ahead and balance out the grid over there and generate more revenue for NIO. Over there at a traditional stationary storage plant, things like gravimetric and volumetric energy density don't really matter as much as they do inside of a vehicle, since these batteries are just sitting in a field, so their weight isn't really a factor. And then, since land is so cheap, it's okay if the batteries take up a bit more space. But eventually the batteries will end up degrading so much that they're no longer even really useful for stationary storage. So at that point, they can just recycle them, or of course they can just throw them away. But I would expect most of these companies, they want to recycle the batteries since most of the materials in there are quite valuable. So if they can recycle them, then they can cut down on their raw materials costs for building new batteries. Another concern I have is that the value of NIO's battery as a service subscription will slowly decline in value over time alongside the cost of batteries declining, since in the future, if the cost of batteries is not that much more than just not having the battery in there, then people will just choose to own the battery up front rather than paying a subscription over time. Another issue I see for battery swapping is that as DC fast charging speeds continue to improve, then the time you save by choosing battery swapping compared to DC fast charging will also decline as well. Another disadvantage is that since the battery needs to be removable from the vehicle, it seems like it'll be pretty much impossible for NIO to adopt a structural battery pack design like what Tesla is doing, which reduces the cost of manufacturing the vehicles. However, this is kind of an advantage in some way because since Tesla and probably other manufacturers as well will move towards the structural battery pack design, then all of those companies are going to get locked out of the ability to use battery swap stations. So if battery swapping turns out to be the way to go, then NIO is going to have a big lead there, and all of the other automakers are going to be left behind. But if it turns out that battery swapping is not the way to go, then NIO is going to be stuck with a lot of expensive swapping stations that aren't really that valuable to anybody other than themselves. They might be able to modify their swap stations to be compatible with other automakers' batteries if those other automakers are interested in doing battery swapping, but a battery swap station is really only valuable to a company that's doing battery swapping. So if NIO ended up in a bad spot financially and needed to liquidate their assets, I would imagine these battery swap stations would be pretty difficult to turn into cash. But that's pretty much it for today's video. Hopefully you all learned a lot from this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see all of you in the next video.